Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Usually I don't do work in the evening because the sun's starting to go down, but in this case, it's a special occasion. It's Thursday. It's not Thursday, actually. As you guys saw in the last video, this front area was where the car got hit, and we're going to replace that, which means I need to pull off this piece and this bottom piece from the main bar across the top, because I'm getting new parts of those probably tomorrow, and I just want to make sure that I know how to get them off as easily as possible, so I'm not looking like a complete idiot waiting to try to get those off at the guy's place where I'm picking them up. We're also hopefully going to try to get a lot of the other front put back together. I don't know if we're going to be able to source a bumper in time, but we need to get this finished first, because once this is fixed, that's the majority of our issues done right there. I mean, that's pretty straightforward, so we're just gonna go ahead, dive in, and start taking some pieces off, and I'll catch you guys up once we run into an inevitable issue. So let's get to work.
The next day.
Good morning. So last night we got a good amount done. Now we pulled one of the supports off. There it is. And it was looking a little worse for wear. So we got a replacement one of these. Now for the actual bar by the radiator, I wasn't able to get that one off because there were spot welds that I just couldn't get to drill off. But we were able to straighten it out quite a bit. So it should actually work just fine. It's not actually structurally supporting anything other than holding the top of the radiator support. So it actually doesn't need to be perfectly straight, which is great. So what we're going to do now is I got a bunch of parts and we're going to put them on. I have the replacement support bar, I have headlights, and I also have hood struts. But we're gonna go ahead and get started with that while I try to source a bumper, so let's get to work. Dude, check it out. I'm borrowing a friend's camera this week. It should have stabilization. Not entirely sure on the sound quality, but ooh, you're getting smooth video. So here's where we're at, because of course, ran into some issues. So first off, this piece went on great. Then we got the hinge in and everything, but we're not gonna do the mirror yet because it's a new day now and we're going to go to the lift kit because that's what we're most excited about anyway. But there was one other thing, and it's that headlight didn't fit. And you're thinking, oh good, you got a backup. No, I tried to buy that one first. It also didn't fit. I got two headlights for a Toyota Sienna that don't fit. But now that we have that front frame piece on, I feel so much better about the car, and it's time to lift it. I like genuinely, I've been so excited about this. Now you guys saw in the live stream that I had this last Monday, the actual process of myself photoshopping to what this car is gonna look like. And the lift is the biggest deal of it. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna start with the front and work our way to the back. Front's gonna be a little simpler because we have to drop the differential in the back, so I wanna see if I can get that done quick. The one thing I am concerned about, I didn't see if there's an actual wheel lock lug in there, in the glove compartment, because well, they got some locks. If I can't get this off, we're in trouble. That's not good. Well, we're gonna have to figure out a way to get around that. But in the meantime, we are going to start lifting the car and getting things all jacked up, because I got some big tires behind me too that are going on, and I'm just so excited. It's early in the morning, but it's time to get to work. We're gonna start with jacking up the car. I mean, you're gonna see it. Let's get the car off the ground. All right, we have everything here that is for the lift kit, and there's a bunch going on here. We have even more pieces here on the other side. We're gonna need to cut and extend the exhaust, replace a lot of the bolts, and drop the differential as well. That's all mostly for the rear of the car. The front of the car is super simple. All we're doing is we're dropping this old struts out of there, putting these spaces on top, throwing in a camber bolt, and that's all good to go. The rear is going to be a big task in and of itself. So let's get started on the front. We're gonna start by taking off some of the wipers and the top cowl assembly so we can easily access the struts. And then we're gonna take off the struts, put the spacers back on, and get it all bolted up. All right, we got our first side done. Now this front is super easy, as I kind of mentioned. Here's all we had to do. So we pulled the entire strut out. Then we replaced this top bolt with a camber bolt so the camber can be adjusted in and out. Placed this with a shorter tie rod bar. Tie rod, is that the right term for it? We're going with it. And then we put a spacer up here, and that's all we needed to do. The front was incredibly simple. The back, it's gonna be tough. I'm gonna try to get the other side done today, and then tomorrow, which will be the same video, we're gonna come back and start working on the rear end. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that other side done, and we'll meet up in the back.
1 hour later.
All right, we got the other side on. I think it's time to take it for a quick test drive, but let's look at this first. That is how high it is. That's just ridiculous. Need that alignment pretty badly though. Goodness gracious, that's bad. Also, I don't know what's up with the kit, but the tie rod they gave us just doesn't fit quite right. Like, it feels like the bottom one should be reversed 180, like this bottom point right here. Anyway though, let's go ahead and take it for a quick off-road drive. All right, here we go. So far, so good. I mean, we've gone 2 inches, but like no pops or anything. We are off-road. I'm just like intently listening right now, so there's noises coming from the front, but they sound pretty normal. It just sounds like the shock's coming in and out. Well, for the most part, it seems pretty fine, so I think we're gonna back it in, clean out the driveway, and get to work on the rear. Now we have the back up, but things are only getting more complicated now. Unlike the front, this isn't just putting in a spacer, a new tie rod, a camber bolt, and then calling it good. We have to drop the differential, pull the axles off, lower the differential, cut the exhaust, add new brake line extensions, and then even add the spacers. There's a lot going on. Now, one of the most comments, if not the most comment that I get, is that people want to do some of the work that I'm doing, but they just don't feel qualified, or they feel a little overwhelmed when taking on a task this big. And I mean, so do I. So here's the process that I do for something this complicated, and it's what I'm going to do. This came with the car. It's a diagram of all the parts, and I've circled in red all the parts that we're going to replace. But what's even better is that there's also instructions as would come with any other installation. These instructions, line by line, sentence by sentence, tell us the process of what we're going to do in order to lift the rear end of the car. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this one sentence at a time. We're going to read a sentence, we're going to do what it says, we're going to check it off and move on to the next step. Simple as that. It's eliminating all of my mechanical knowledge. It's taking out any error that I would introduce by myself. We're going simply by what they tell us to do. So this is something where by following the instructions, even if you have zero experience at all, you'll be able to do this. This one won't be as much of a time lapse, but we'll be doing this one step at a time. What do you want, Foo? Food. Same. So what is our first step? Our first step is to remove the rear wheels, and we have that done. On all-wheel drive vans, unbolt the axles and drive shaft from the rear differential. Start with that first. We're gonna cut it off here. We're gonna unbolt the axles from the drive shaft and the rear differential. So underneath the car, we're at the rear differential here, and we're gonna unbolt the axles here, these bolts on the opposite side, and from the drive shaft, which is these ones right here. So we're disconnecting any spline or any axle that goes into the differential. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 bolts. Let's get these done. That step is done. Remove the differential from the van. This may take a couple more bolts, but pretty much anything else that's holding on the differential, we're gonna unbolt to take that out. So this is the differential. We're a little close up, but it looks like there's 3 bolts left. One here, the same on the opposite side here, this one up top. Now there's other bolts that connect to this bar, but we're just gonna take this one off so all the supports come out with us, because I think we're going to need to extend them later. 3 more bolts, 1, 2, 3, and the differential should come off. All right, we got a differential out, so now we can cross that off. And up next is remove the ABS speed sensor from the axle or body end. And we can go to our diagram, and we can see right here is the speed sensor. The speed sensor is this one right here, so it comes to the back, and it'll disconnect right here. You can tell it's not the brake sensor or the brake line, because the brake line is gonna go all the way to the caliper. Just slap a 10 mil on. That bolt comes out and the sensor pops right out. Nice. And we're gonna go ahead and throw the bolt right back in so we don't lose it. The same thing on the other side. Finagle that out, put the screw back in, and then we can cross that off. Next up is to disconnect the parking brake cables from the body. So that's this cable right here. We're gonna take off the 10 mil here. There's another one inside, and then do the same for the opposite side. And just like that, this cable has been disconnected. We can go ahead and cross this off. And the next thing is to remove and discard rear brake flexible hose from axle and body. Now you never wanna discard anything until after everything is completely back on and not just installed, but tested. So we're gonna take it off, don't throw it away. We're not throwing ours away. We're holding on to it. Now there are 2 flexible hoses for the brakes. One's right here and one's up here. And we're gonna be replacing this one because this whole thing is gonna drop down further. And we're gonna be replacing it with a hose that they gave us that's just a bit longer. It's this top one, not this one right here, because this one stays, this one gets replaced.
1 hour later.
So there's a part to working on cars that a lot of people don't show you, and I'm gonna show you. So if you guys remember, the step we're working on now is getting this brake line in the back off to replace with this new one. Now, here's what I haven't shown you guys. I've been at this for 5 hours. Not joking. Multiple days, total time spent has been 5 hours. And what's happened is that this back part right up here, I could unscrew it all the way, but then it doesn't come undone. Like for whatever reason, it seems like there's just one thread left, but when I try to pull it out, it won't pull out. So I decided I'm just gonna screw it back in. I'll keep this part unmounted, and then I could just rebend the line carefully away. But then I tried to put this back in and it cross-threaded, and then I kind of got mad and went home. So we're gonna try to undo that one thread, get it back in, and then we're gonna leave the brake lines on as is because I think I can take this line here, unbend it just enough to make it fit. So it's not the way it's intended to do, and I see why it's not intended that way because the company that made the kit doesn't want you actually messing with the hard lines, but I think it's gonna work out just fine. So we're gonna go ahead and get this brake line back on, and then I'll meet up with you then.
10 years later.
All right, so here's the solution that we ended up going with. I decided to just reattach the brake line up here. It's the spot that it was threaded, but I just used a whole bunch of plumber's tape and got it actually in super tight so it shouldn't leak. And then I adjusted the brake line to, instead of tucking down on the inside here, come all the way up to here, giving it a few extra inches of leeway on the inside. Now this line was only about 1.5 inches to 2 inches longer than the other flexible line, so there really wasn't much extra flex needed. Obviously this isn't quite ideal. If you can get that brake line off, please do that. Don't take this as law of, hey, you can work your way around it. This is just a fix that we have to do because of our specific situation. But we're now able to go on to the next step. The next step for us is with the Sawzall is measure 2 inches back from the muffler and cut 10 inches out of the tailpipe. So what we're doing is we're cutting off this resonator in the exhaust in order to drop it down. So we were supplied with this exhaust, and you can tell here on the front where that bend is, that drops down a couple inches in order to give the exhaust more clearance. Because as you can see, the axle's kind of sitting on the exhaust right now. Obviously it's unbolted, so it's just laying there, but that still needs to sit down a little further so that the exhaust can fit up just right. So we're gonna go ahead and mark out 2 inches from the muffler up front, and then we're gonna mark out another 10-inch span and then make a couple cuts and get this exhaust freed up. That section of the exhaust has been cut. One half ends there, and the other half right in the middle of the screen, a little tough to see, but it's been cut there. And that'll be replaced by this, so this again will drop down and come back over. And we are on to the next thing. We only have a few more steps of disassembly before we start putting everything back together. Next thing on our list is to take off the shock absorbers. So we're gonna put a floor jack under the coil springs and remove the shock absorbers. There's a nut on the bottom, but you're also gonna have to take this nut off the top. Now, it's behind these covers on the inside of the van, very easily accessible. You pop that off, it's got a little rubber cover on top of that. Take that off. Oh, and that fell inside. And then you have easy access to your bolt right there. We're gonna start by taking this top bolt off, and then we'll be able to easily get the bottom one off, drop everything down, and pull it right out. Okay, one jump cut later, I actually took those 2 bolts off. It was really quick. I think you guys know how to turn lefty-loosey. So the next part is actually starting to get a little confusing, but I do have it worked out. So let me show you exactly what's gonna happen from here. So the next thing we need to do is we need to remove this spring. We're just gonna pull it out. After that, we're gonna disconnect the bushing on this side and the other, but there's a specific way to do it. The way that we're doing it is it says to loosen both up and then drop them one at a time. I don't think there's really a way to do both at the same time anyway, but that's what it says. Once we have that off, we're gonna trim this and start putting everything back together. So let's go ahead and get this off, essentially drop the whole rear subframe off, and we'll go from there. Again, I know this is probably a little intimidating for some people who don't have as much mechanical knowledge. And again, I don't have a whole lot either, but we're just taking the instructions as they say, one step at a time. So this is the next step. Let's get the springs out, and let's get those bolts undone and have the subframe dropped off. All right, we now have the bolts taken out of here. Now it hasn't dropped down, and we do have to be careful when dropping it because the instructions said to put the brake lines back on, but I don't think they actually wanted us to do this yet because they're still connected, which means we can't drop this down too far. So the way I'm gonna try to do this is I'm going to try to lift up this back end and rotate the front down about 4 or 5 inches. And then once that's out, we're going to need to cut off the bottom quarter of this area. And the reason we're doing that is to make clearance for this new drop bracket. So this will bolt up on the inside right where that was, and it'll drop it down a few inches so that way we have a new place to bolt up the subframe. This will allow us to be lower, and then we'll be able to start reinstalling everything else, including a new spacer for the spring, spacer for the strut, the extensions for the differential. So we're gonna start by rotating this up, getting this down, cutting this out, and getting this attached, and we'll meet up after we have this back on. All right, so big win on the rear. We got the first part actually installed to get it lifted. This rear bracket is completely on. 3 bolts on the top, 1, 2, and then another one straight in the back there. Took a little bit of work, about 30 minutes plus of work to get both sides in. And then another about 10, 15 minutes to get this bottom section actually bolted back in. That is through. Up next comes the springs. Now the spring fell down, but we're putting that on. And we also have this extension that'll mount up on the top of the spring. That'll give it a bit of cushion. So we're gonna drop it down, get that installed, put it on, and then do the same for the strut strut, there's an extension on top that is going to go on top. We're gonna get that hooked up on top there. And then after that, it's really just getting the differential and axles back on and bolted up. And then we are pretty much good to go. All right, big update now. We have the struts back on, we have the springs back on. Everything is bolted up here for the end suspension. No differential or anything on the inside yet, but everything on the outside is done. And this is huge because it took a while to do. What happened was once I got this back on, I tried to get the coil spring back in, but for whatever reason, it wasn't fitting. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna unbolt these, attach the strut and the spring, and then see if I can get the front end back up. That just wasn't working again. So I had to take all that back off again. I bolted this back up, and magically, I don't know how it happened, but suddenly there was room to actually get the coil spring and spacer back in. So we went ahead and put all those back in. Everything bolted up just great. So now we're at the point where it's time to install the differential. Look how weird this dog is. Goodness gracious, who does he think he is? So for the differential, we're installing spacers on each side, these bushings that extend through. He also supplied us bolts, long bolts here that'll fit all the way through, so we'll reuse those instead of the stock ones that it came with. And then we have this drop bracket extension that'll drop here and connect to the original bracket. From there, it's just repeating the first steps that we did to disconnect the axles and the differential. So we're gonna go ahead and put all those back on, so everything will be completely mechanically put back on by the next time we meet up. So let's get to work. We're really close to done. This is getting really exciting. All right, we got our differential back on. We have our axles attached. The driveline is attached in the front. So the last thing we have to do installation-wise is the exhaust, because right now it's still just hanging there, cut off on the inside there, but we're gonna take this extension, hook it up. We have 3 clamps that'll hold this all together, and then we'll be done with the installation. After that, we need to bleed the brakes. I'm actually gonna have to relook at my brake line again, but once we have the exhaust on, we bleed the brakes, and we're able to take it for our first test drive. All right, we now have the exhaust on. It goes down underneath. It's actually touching the axle and this frame just a tiny bit, but I'm actually not concerned because once we put the wheel on and get it set on the ground, it's gonna lift this whole suspension side up, so it will be perfectly clear. Now, all we have to do in order to get this car able to drive is we have to bleed the brakes. So that's our final step. Then we'll throw the wheels on. It's not the off-road tires yet, but we're just gonna throw them on as is and take it for a test drive. All right, after a combined roughly 15-ish hours of work, we finally have the van lifted and ready for a test drive. This actually looks so good. I love the space in the back. I can't wait to get bigger tires on and to throw a spacer out to fill it in. Front looks a little odd just because it needs an alignment. It's a little bent in, but I think it's time to actually take this for a drive. So let's go ahead and do that now. I'll slap a camera out there. We'll take it around our normal test drive. This thing is so cool. Oh man. All right, let's go for it and hope the brakes bled correctly. Battery's dead. Rip. All right, the van's on. We're gonna go for a drive. Actually fixed the windshield too, so we could actually see through that now, which is great. Just dusty. Nice, glad those work. Put it in gear and get going. Test to see, do the brakes actually work? Brakes are ever so slightly squishy, but they work, which is good. It's enough for a test drive. We are going. Yeah, I'm gonna need to bleed the brakes again, but this is a start. This is so cool. We are just rolling. My brother and dog are watching me and they're so stinking confused on what's going on. Like, why? Why not? We're in a minivan driving off-road. This is phenomenal. Alignment is all sorts of whack as well, but it's kind of what I'm expecting, at least for the start, because those front wheels are a little off. But no sound from the rear at all, which is just great. Like, it's silent in the back. There's a bit of noise coming from the front. It just sounds like something's maybe ever so slightly loose, so I'll give it another look when we get back. I mean, it's just, I think he's driving like a champ. Look at this thing, completely lifted up. Oh, there's so much space between the wheels now. Oh, this is amazing. I can't wait to get bigger tires on this. Of course, a spacer to make everything pushed out just a bit further, because right now that gap is a bit rough. It really tucks in, so we're gonna have that filled out. Oh, this looks so good. Lean back inside the car. This is so cool. So as I mentioned, this took about 15 hours of work. It took a while. We ran into some issues as expected. I do need an alignment. I do need the brakes re-bled, but we got everything sorted out. The brake line issue, we got that sorted out, which is good. Quick test drive. Rear sounds amazing, which is like there's no sound coming from it. And the reason why I'm so happy with that, not just because it's like no issues, but there's so many parts going into it. The front, I'll take another quick inspection of it to make sure everything is okay. Didn't feel weird at all, felt great. A little bit of noise, but it felt great. And then, and then it's just finishing up the hood and stuff in the front, and goodness gracious, this van will be at least ready to go. So run into some speed bumps along the way as expected, but stay tuned for more videos coming out. You should be watching the channel every single day. I won't be posting every day, but if you don't want to do that, turn on notifications. Please subscribe if you enjoyed this, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much. Goodbye.